Syria slams Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the West, demanding they stop undermining Annan's mission by paying and supporting armed groups. A former employee of the Arab satellite network Al Jazeera says the news channel fabricates stories on Syria.
The reality on the ground in Syria is different from what is portrayed by Al Jazeera.
Britain's Sky News defends hacking into emails on 2 occasions, calling the act editorially justified and in the public interest. And fresh anti-austerity protests are held in Greece, where a senior pensioner killed himself a day earlier over economic hardship. It's 4:30 a.m. here in Tehran. This is Press TV's World News. Syria's envoy to the UN has called for Western states and their regional allies to stop funding armed groups that are fighting government forces in the country.
Of course we are in favor of peace, but we want all these external interferences in our domestic affairs to stop. The Qataris, the Saudis and Turkey are providing these armed groups with weapons. This is a violation of the international law. The government will be there in the implementation of each one of the components of Mr. Annan's plan. We are a sovereign state. We are keen interest in safeguarding our political independence and our sovereignty. We are not a banana republic.
Syria's envoy to the UN also said foreign-backed opposition groups must give a written commitment not to take advantage of any withdrawal by government troops from Syrian cities. Syria has agreed to a peace plan crafted by the UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan to end the unrest in the country. Annan's office says it's received information that Syrian forces have begun withdrawing from conflict areas. The Syrian unrest has left thousands of people dead. Employees of the Arab satellite network Al Jazeera have once again accused the news channel of fabricating stories on Syria.
The reality on the ground in Syria is different from what is portrayed by Al Jazeera. The reality is much different. The truth is now just an opinion of the director. In Al Jazeera, I can even lie to benefit the production. When I told them about my resignation, they sat with me for hours trying to convince me not to quit. But my mind was already made up. After I submitted my resignation letter, my decision was firm. I knew I wasn't going to retreat on my decision.
Ahmed is among 5 people to quit the channel, citing bias in its views towards Syria. The Qatar-based Al Jazeera has been accused of fabricating its news stories and even the footage it airs during its news broadcasts. The channel's former staff say Al Jazeera follows the policies of the Qatari government. The channel is even suspected of smuggling communications equipment to armed militants in Syria from Turkey and Lebanon. Lizzie Phelan, a freelance journalist, told us more about Al Jazeera's latest news fabrication accusation.
The beginning of the Arab Spring, I mean, it's been quite clear. I've said throughout the past year that Al Jazeera has performed the biggest propaganda trick that I've ever seen personally in my lifetime, that we've seen in this generation at least. I mean, obviously Al Jazeera gained a lot of credibility on the Arab street from reporting critically in the war on terror, but then we saw a complete U-turn when the Arab Spring started off, when it went from being an objective voice to being an active participant in events. And not only, for example, calling protests, for example, in Egypt and Tunisia and other places, but we saw when I was in Libya that they would actually report on events before that even happened. So it was almost like they were calling for them to happen. For example, when I was in Libya, there were a number of times where I'd wake up in the morning and I'd turn on the television and I'd watch Al Jazeera and see, for example, that they'd say that an area like Litan had been taken by the rebels, and then I'd go to that area and it had been far from taken by the rebels. There'd still be strong support for the fallen leader, Muammar Gaddafi.
The British broadcaster Sky News has admitted hacking into the email account of a man who faked his own death. Sky News, partly owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, says it authorized a journalist to access the emails of John Darwin and his wife. Darwin faked his death in a life insurance scam before moving to Panama to start a new life. Murdoch's media empire has been heavily criticized in recent months for hacking scandals. A storm of phone hacking allegations forced his British newspaper wing to shut down the 168-year-old News of the World tabloid last July. The tabloid admitted to hacking into the phones of crime victims, war dead, and celebrities to generate stories. In Britain, the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that 10 members of its staff have been referred to the police watchdog over incidents of alleged racism. Scotland Yard says 8 police officers and another member of its staff have been suspended for alleged racist incidents. At least 3 other officers are also placed on restricted duties. In total, 20 officers are under investigation in relation to claims of racism. The Metropolitan Police came under pressure to clamp down on racism in its ranks after a recent report on the alleged abuse of a young black man following last year's unrest in London. Europe is getting ready to celebrate Easter, but despite the positive mood, there's one thing people worry about: the economy. The EU is now in a recession. Fresh numbers indicate that unemployment has reached an almost 15-year high, and the economy has shrunk even more. Yilda Sadakova now reports.
Easter is here, and in the capital of Europe, Brussels, many are preparing to mark the occasion and enjoy their days off. But this holiday season, one thing is weighing on the minds of many across Europe: the economic crisis, the biggest one the EU has seen.
I'm a little worried about the Europe, and Spain and Greece and Belgium too. We have been to a restaurant today, and the owner, he said it's hard to be a restaurant owner also in Belgium, so I'm a little worried.
And this woman says that although things have not become too difficult for her, she's worried about the future of her children.
Because everything is more expensive, and we live in a world that's very hard and for everyone to find a job, and it's difficult.
Fresh economic data confirms that it is getting harder to find a job. Unemployment in the euro area reached an almost 15-year high in February, 10.8%. The area's retail sales have also shrank slightly, and the eurozone economy contracted by 0.3% in the last quarter of 2011. Back then, 7 euro countries were already in a recession.
We should be worried about growth across the European Union. We have problems which were there before the crisis, and the crisis has aggravated them. But in this immediate crisis, when we look at the euro crisis, the biggest problem is that certain countries are performing rather well in relative to the others.
Germany and a handful of other countries are doing well, but nations on the periphery of the eurozone, like Greece, Spain and Portugal, are in a recession. This, economists say, is creating a gap, so Europe needs growth measures tailored to its struggling countries. But such measures have yet to transpire. Instead, policymakers have largely focused on budget cuts, which stifle growth. The grim economic data and the overall situation point to one thing experts say: that the current EU recession may not be short-lived like politicians say it might be. Yilda Sadakova, Press TV, Brussels.
Greek police have clashed with protesters in central Athens a day after a man committed suicide over economic hardship. Some protesters hurled rocks at police who used tear gas to disperse them. On Wednesday, several thousand protesters gathered in front of the Parliament building to voice their anger at the government's austerity measures. Demonstrators were further infuriated by the public suicide of a cash-strapped Greek pensioner early Wednesday. Greece is facing its worst financial crisis since World War II. The European Union and the International Monetary Fund have forced the government to implement harsh austerity measures in return for financial aid. Rising unemployment, higher taxes, and shrinking wages have all made life hard for ordinary Greeks. Some news in brief now. A Saudi Arabian official says a fugitive Iraqi Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi will remain in the kingdom until the Iraqi premier is pushed out of office. Hashimi arrived in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday after visiting senior officials in Qatar. Baghdad had urged Doha to hand Hashimi over to Iraq, but instead he was allowed to fly to Saudi Arabia. Baghdad wants to put Hashimi on trial for his alleged involvement in terror activities. A rocket attack has killed at least 2 civilians and wounded 4 others in eastern Afghanistan. Afghan officials say the rocket hit a residential building during fighting between government forces and Taliban militants in Kapisa province. But the Taliban claimed the rocket was fired by U.S.-led foreign troops. French President Nicolas Sarkozy has promised to enact the so-called Golden Rule within months if he's re-elected. The rule commits France to balanced budgets. He made the pledge as he released a detailed manifesto ahead of the first round of the upcoming presidential vote. Sarkozy's popularity has taken a nosedive over his government's austerity measures. A new poll has found that the British Prime Minister's popularity rating has fallen to its lowest level since he took office 2 years ago. The YouGov poll found that only 30% of those asked believe David Cameron would make the best Prime Minister. And Press TV has lodged a complaint against a German media authority for removing the Iranian broadcaster off air in Europe. The move comes after Bavaria-based BLM ordered the SES platform service to immediately stop Press TV from sending signals to Europe. Press TV's legal team has threatened to seek compensation if BLM's doesn't reverse its decision. And still to come, Turkey begins the trial of 1980 coup leaders. Stay tuned for that. Thanks a lot for staying with us. Now in Bahrain, the daughter of prominent human rights activist Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja says her father's health continues to deteriorate. The Al Khalifa regime continues to defy national and international calls to release the activist who is on the verge of death. Here's a look at his story.
This is a newly released picture of jailed Bahraini human rights defender Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, who is struggling with life and death. Khawaja is in critical condition because of his now nearly 2-month hunger strike. His family has issued an urgent appeal to save his life, saying the activist may go into cardiac arrest at any time.
It is outrageous from this authority. It doesn't listen to the word calling for release of someone who doesn't even can talk.
Khawaja began his hunger strike to protest his illegal detention and a ruling by a Bahraini military court which sentenced him to life in prison. Last week, Amnesty International urged Manama to free him because of fears for his life. Protesters have been holding rallies on an almost daily basis calling for his release. But the Bahraini regime has ignored national and international outcry over his conditions.
Here we have a gross violation of human rights, and the United States is not really paying attention.
Khawaja is one among thousands of Bahrainis detained by the Al Khalifa regime since last year. Scores have been killed or tortured. The regime has not even spared senior citizens, women and children. People have been taking to the streets against the regime's brutality since the revolution began in February 2011. Initially demanding reforms, the popular protest movement faced a deadly crackdown by Saudi-backed regime forces. Bahrain has long been criticized for its rights record. International rights groups have accused the kingdom of failing to implement reforms demanded by an independent commission which investigated the deadly crackdown in June. The West and its media outlets continue their silence on the grave violations of human rights in the kingdom. Washington, which has its fifth fleet in Bahrain, has particularly been accused of double standard by failing to address the appalling repression of the pro-democracy movement in the island. Analysts predict that the piling up of popular resentment in Bahrain is bound to backfire against U.S. interests in the region.
Iran has reportedly rejected Austria and Switzerland as the venue for a fresh round of talks with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. Iranian media say Tehran doesn't want the upcoming talks to be held in the Turkish city of Istanbul either. Instead, Iran prefers holding talks in Iraq. Iraq's foreign ministry has said that Tehran has proposed Baghdad as a venue for talks. Iraqi Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zabari said he welcomed the idea and pledged to make the necessary contacts with relevant international parties. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced last weekend that the talks will take place on April the 13th and 14th in Istanbul. But EU diplomats have said the venue is still under discussion. Turkey has put the surviving leaders of the 1980 coup on trial. Kenan Evren, a retired army general and former president, and Tahsin Şahinkaya, a former Air Force chief, are charged with committing acts against the forces of the state by masterminding the military takeover. Press TV's Mehdi Qolizadeh is in Ankara with the story.
The surviving leaders of Turkey's 1980 coup d'etat are put on trial in Ankara. Kenan Evren, a nonagenarian retired army general and former president, and Tahsin Şahinkaya, a former Air Force chief, have not yet appeared in court in person due to health reasons. According to the indictment, the 2 retired generals have committed acts against the forces of the state by masterminding the military takeover, in which tens of people were executed and more than 500,000 people were detained, hundreds of whom had died in prisons. About 500 people, including representatives of political parties and groups, have applied to become co-plaintiffs in the case, saying they were victimized by the coup. The historic trial is widely considered as the pinnacle of the Turkish government's moves over the past years, which had ended the domination of military over the Turkish politics. The Turkish cabinet has also decided to become a co-plaintiff in the trial.
Darbelerin ilk ve en önemli muhatabı
The first and the main target of the coups have been the governments, who were the legitimate representatives of the people. Today, as the legitimate representatives of the people, we believe that we're a natural party to the case.
Bu davanın tabii tarafı olduğumuza inanıyoruz.
The main opposition party, the Republican People's Party, has also called on the court to grant it the status of co-plaintiff, as it was one of parties that were closed down by military takeover and its properties were confiscated. Prosecutors have sought life imprisonment for Evren and Şahinkaya, but observers believe that they are highly unlikely to end up in prison because of their frail health conditions. Some of the victims of the coup say prosecuting only 2 old generals is not enough.
Those police forces and groups that supported the coup were not prosecuted. These 2 generals are so old they may die in very near future. This prosecution makes even children laugh.
What will be the benefit of these 2 generals' trial? Kenan Evren is over 90. There are those who torture people.
However, the trial is still seen as a milestone move in strengthening the political and legal infrastructure of the country. The top military commanders in Turkey were untouchable for decades, and they had unseated 4 elected governments since 1960. Just several years ago, the trial of top military generals in the country was unimaginable for many Turkish people. Mehdi Qolizadeh, Press TV, Ankara.
It's time now for a very short break here on Press TV, but after the break we'll tell you more about the following stories. Picnicking under cherry blossoms in Japan. and an age suit that helps doctors realize how it feels to be old.
It was the most amazing thing that I have ever seen, ever.
We started organizing to go back to Gaza.
Our boat was rammed 3 times, twice in the front and 1 on the side.
Next flotilla was a new experience. Big boats, essentially cargo ships, also a big passenger boat with more than 600 people.
A state with all its power attacking a passenger boat. This is the picture that the media should show. This is the right picture.
In Tokyo, cherry blossoms reached their peak bloom this week, and thousands of visitors gathered in parks to celebrate the event. The cherry blossom is considered a special flower for the Japanese people. It symbolizes the arrival of spring. The cherry blossom flower blooms for only 1 week of the year. Crowds flock to parks in their neighborhoods to soak up the sight they have waited for all winter. Iranians have a similar tradition on the 13th day of spring. It's called Sizde Bedar. For elderly people, an everyday task can often become a burden. To really understand the problem, university doctors have come up with a solution. The age suit. It helps medical students understand the loss of flexibility in the joints and a loss of eyesight in old people that can make simple actions tiring and time-consuming. This is how it works.
The whole suit weighs about 10 kilograms. This is to simulate that older people have less muscle power and less muscle mass. We also have the helmet and the visor that makes it harder to see and to differentiate between colors. And we have the headphones that simulate how older people can have difficulties hearing.
Since October 2011, around 100 students have used the suit for training. They've all gained a feel for what it's like for an elderly person. The jacket and trousers are made especially heavy. They are a bit like wearing clothes made out of lead. And the helmet, visor, and headphones severely restrict the senses. The whole point is for the students to understand just how difficult normal tasks can be for elderly people. Horst Zucker is a regular at the clinic. He gives his opinion on the project.
This is necessary in medical science. In order to design the therapies, they need to know how it feels to be an old person and what you can actually do.
Competitions at the 7th International RoboCup Iran Open have kicked off in Tehran. The 3-day event has brought together more than 300 teams from 14 countries. Saman Kujori now reports.
A demonstration of latest achievements in robotics, the 7th RoboCup Iran Open competitions has officially kicked off in Tehran.
In addition to the host country Iran, 13 countries are taking part at the 7th Iran Open 2012 competitions.
The competition hosts 395 teams from Iran, India, the United States, China, Germany, the Netherlands, Pakistan, Britain, Greece, Mexico, the Czech Republic, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkey. Flying robots, humanoids, rescue robots, soccer player robots, and submarine robots compete in the 3-day competitions.
It is my first time and I'm quite astonished by everything around here. This big competition, this big hall, so many people here. Yeah, it's quite cool.
A variety of categories are open, including football simulation, 2- and 3-dimensional simulators, rescue robots, and humanoids.
Iran is the 4th country in the world in terms of winning most awards at different international RoboCop competitions. Iran Open also provides a good opportunity for different teams to test their achievements in robotics.
RoboCop is an international robotics competition founded in 1997. The aim is to promote robotics and artificial intelligence research by offering a publicly appealing but formidable challenge.
Yeah, the level of the regional competition is always quite high, comparable with the World Championship. You always have 2 or 3 new teams that dare to learn, but that's precisely where regional competition are therefore. And last year also one of the new teams even became a world champion. So it's still possible for new teams with the support of the regional competitions to reach the level of the world.
The ultimate goal of RoboCop is that by mid-21st century, a team of fully autonomous humanoid robot soccer players shall win the soccer game, complying with the official rule of the FIFA against the winner of the most recent World Cup. Samo Kujuri, Press TV, Tehran.
That's all for the moment. Thanks for watching.